Well, all right, Brad Warren, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Yes, one of our board members, Lynn Cherry, she's been involved. She and her husband have been involved with affair recovery for a number of years, and the Hope Rising conference is something that we're going to be talking about as a great resource for couples. But she's the one that made the connection between us, and I was so excited to be able to get you on to the podcast to be able to talk about the Hope Rising conference. But before we get to that, I would love our listeners and viewers to be able to get to know you a little bit. So, can you share with us kind of a little bit of your own story and how you've gotten into the particular work that you're currently doing with couples?
Sure, sure. Um, so, you know, I, you talk about, you know, be, being broken. I came from a very broken background. Grew up with a very dysfunctional family. My father was an alcoholic. My mom was a rageaholic. She was addicted to anger, and there was just a lot of tension, a lot of chaos at home, and for me, I just kind of grew up feeling, unworthy. My father was never around. He was either working or he was at the bar, and so there was this great sense of unworthiness and abandonment that I felt, and so I didn't feel like I really belonged. In my family, there wasn't much, uh, just loving affection there, and so I found myself just looking for solace any way I could. And one of the things that happened is I just, at the age of 9, I stumbled across pornography. And, boy, howdy, for somebody, kid like me who didn't feel wanted, all of a sudden I had this thing that, felt like going to Disneyland, right? And so, it gave me this feeling that I'd never experienced before, and I just latched onto it, and it became a source of comfort for me, and that became part of my life, part of my routine, and uh, brought that into my marriage, uh, and for a really long time in our marriage, I struggled with pornography, but you know life gets very stressful, careers, children, all these things. And I got to a point in my life where it became very unmanageable. And so then, the pornography I was looking at wasn't enough. And so then I started acting out with others. And so, uh, led to multiple affairs. And it was about 12 years ago, kind of when, everything kind of came crashing down. And, for me, I ended up on this. So I had some friends, some close friends who had started a ministry, and it was about just ministering to the brokenness in men. And so they had asked me to go on this weekend intensive, and of course my answer was no, because I knew you get me out in the wilderness with some dudes and let God have at me, then you know I knew what was going to happen. I didn't want any of my secrets to come out. But that's exactly, so of course, Holy Spirit acted on me. And what did I do? I signed up and went on this weekend intensive. And what I feared happened.
Mm.
I had this experience with God. I was alone on this 1,000-acre ranch. I was kind of off by myself. And, God called me to the carpet in a very loving way. Um, are you seeing that?
That's fine.
I had some, okay. So God called me to the carpet in this, very loving way, not at all what I had expected. And so what did I do? I came home and disclosed to my wife uh, what what I'd been struggling with. Now, it's kind of half truth because I didn't fully disclose everything. I was still trying to manage
Hmm.
the flow of information, uh, but anyway, it after about 4 months of kind of this push and pull, finally disclosed everything, and our healing journey began. So, so that's kind of how recovery started for me is that experience.
Yeah, so I want to ask a couple questions. It's interesting to me when you talked about being introduced to pornography at 9, and you'd briefly shared with me off air about how you had made a move to a new state when you were around 9 years old, and then
Yeah,
so you've got this uh, unhealthy dynamic with your dad. You go to a new location, which is already a stressor on family and your young mind, and then boom, you get introduced to pornography. So it's kind of like there was a little bit of this perfect storm for the ingredients of you being set up to be vulnerable to getting hooked into pornography.
absolutely.
I also think then, interestingly, when you talk about going on the intensive, isn't can you talk a little bit about how you mentioned it as, hey, the thing that I feared would happen happened. And yet also, can you talk about how that's really what in your heart of hearts you needed and wanted maybe the most?
Yeah, yeah. I had spent all my life, maintaining lies. I had, of course, growing up in the environment I did, I had to lie, I had to pretend, compartmentalize, keep things hidden, uh, to try to maintain some amount of peace in my family growing up. And those are the same behaviors I did as an adult in my marriage. The the thing that I really feared was that once I was exposed, I would be rejected.
Mm.
I mean, that was the fear. And on this weekend intensive, it was the first and only time I'd actually heard the voice of God. And I think I'd always expected God to speak to me in this very big, harsh, critical tone. And he was very sweet and loving. It was just the kind of the sweetest whisper in my ear, and he told me, he said, you have to tell Kristen.
Mm.
And I immediately said, hell no, I'm not doing that. And so, to the God of the universe. And so
Right.
he
Yeah.
goes, no, you have to. And I said, she'll abandon me. I said, she'll leave me. She'll take the kids. I said, my friends will abandon me. And he said, but I won't abandon you.
Mm.
Of course, I lost it at that point. So, um, kind of choke up
Can I
even
interject
now.
real
Yeah,
quick right here? Because I feel like
sure.
I've got a burning question. What was
Yeah.
that like for you from your heavenly father to hear that he would never abandon you?
Well, I never believed it to be true because, I always had thought of God as, being just putting up with me. It's like I could never really be in his good graces. It was, it's kind of an obligation. He's like, I said I'd save you. So, you did these things. Now I kind of have to. But there was just this, I expected just kind of disappointment. And, you know, at that moment, I realized that, okay, um, I'm not, I'm not unworthy. There was
Mhm.
this idea that, oh, wait a second, I've attributed to God all of the worst characteristics of my own father, and it's all been a lie.
Mhm.
And, obviously, the biggest part of that was just my own perceptions. But I think religion in and of itself kind of, there were some things I'd been saved kind of late, in my, I think I was 19 at the time, and in a very conservative uh, church, and so a lot of the influences I had were not very gracious,
Mhm.
um, and so it kind of perpetuated some of those thoughts that I'd already had. But at that moment, when I heard him say that, I mean, it kind of blew my world apart, not in a bad way, but in a really good way. It's like, oh wow, there is a different way, and what I've been trying to manage all along that's not been working, you know, there's a different way to do it. And so I finally, just accepted that truth. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what I needed.
So then, obviously, your wife did not abandon you, and you guys are still together. But what did that process of
Yeah.
healing look like for the two of you? What was it like for her? What was it like for you as a couple?
Well, very interesting. So I remember, when I finally did come home, and I'd scheduled our kids to be away, and it was just the two of us. And when I initially disclosed, she describes blacking out. She has no memory, kind of that initial disclosure, and so very traumatic experience for her. Obviously, very painful. Uh, and there was, she really, I think, tried to latch on to me. There was, kind of that wanting to kind of reclaim, you know, the marriage and me initially,
Mhm.
even through all of that pain. And it kind of fluctuated, because then there was, after that initial response, um, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of distance, and her kind of keeping me at bay, because I wasn't safe.
Mhm.
I wasn't a safe person, and I was still hanging on to some lies, and it took me a while to accept the truth and fully disclose. So, um, but for us, you know, in thinking about it, um, it was probably about 4 months of just a lot of struggles, a lot of pain. Again, me trying to manage the flow of information. But after that 4 months, when I finally came to that place of acceptance and disclosed everything, I came to a place of peace. Um, and I wasn't having to juggle lies anymore. And so I had completely offloaded all of my junk. Of course, I dumped it directly onto her. Um, but I think she also found some peace that, okay, she's not seeing defensiveness from me anymore. I'm not trying to cover up or backpedal or anything like that. And so she was able to finally see that, okay, everything's out there. There's truth. I was working at being different, and she could see the hope in that. And so then that's really when our recovery journey really started to kind of move forward.
Mhm.
Um, and so we attended. You mentioned a fair recovery. We attended an intensive weekend that was 8 months in. We were 8 months into recovery when we attended that, and we were already doing really well. And Kristen was already contemplating forgiveness and really committed to that process. Um, so we were at a good place then. But for us, I feel like uh, true, like, healing was probably 2 to 3 years. Just where the triggers began to really decrease. They were less intense. Of course, us being 12 years in, I mean, there are still some triggers that come up. They're not very frequent, and um, they're not as intense. I mean, so uh, again, just a
Yeah.
just a lot of work. We're still working recovery.
Well, I like to think of it this way, you're not going to go through a healing process without scars. And so in the same way you think about your physical body, if you cut yourself or you break a bone or let's say you get a gash in your leg or something. Okay, the healing can be complete, but you've got a scar there. And you know what happens sometimes? When you bump that scar onto something, there's a little bit of pain there. You go, "Oh yeah," and it can remind you it's not the full wound like it was before. But we
Sure.
we live with scars, and I think that's just part of. I'm glad that you mentioned that because I think some people think in the emotional, spiritual realm, and these kinds of things, and relationally, if we go through a healing process, that should never be tender anymore. That should never be something that could. Oh, there's a little bit of a jolt there. It's like, well, it's a scar. It's healed. It shows that it's healed, but it doesn't mean that you have no recollection of that, or that there's nothing that could touch that could cause you to go, oh, wait a second, I'm a little sensitive right now. So,
Right.
can you speak a little bit to that? And then I'd like to know, I'd love for you to tell our listeners about how it appears that this recovery journey made a pretty significant pivot in your life in terms of just even vocationally, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Um, well, speaking to the healing, it's funny. Kristen and I were just talking about this. It was yesterday. It was yesterday morning. We were sitting down talking about that, and defining what healing is. In this journey, and like you said, some people have that perception that, well, when you're fully healed, you don't experience any pain, and that's just entirely impossible because it is part of your story. And uh, you know, Kristen and I, it's not that, I mean, we could do a vocation, we could practice a vocation that doesn't have anything to do with infidelity, and we could not talk about this much at all. But instead, what we did is, she's always wanted to be a therapist. She's always wanted to be a counselor, and she never pursued it. And so then once this happened and we started our recovery journey, she's like, I'm going to go back to school to be a therapist. And she said, do you want to go with me? And I'm like, I got nothing else to do. Sure. And so we did. We went to school, got our master's in clinical mental health counseling, and specifically to help others walk through this journey. And so we talk about this all day, every day. And so sometimes it can be a little triggering, but we manage it really well. We talk about it, um, and in that definition of healing, it's not that there's no pain, but we find that whenever we talk about it, whenever we give our testimony, whenever we share, there's always a little more healing that comes along with that. So avoiding the pain doesn't do us much good. So it's kind of like I've done a lot of 12-step work, and it's like that step 12. You take what you've learned, you pass it on to someone else, and that's what kind of keeps me in recovery is sharing these things. And I may be different than a lot of other counselors because going through my training, I've had, a lot of professors and mentors say, don't self-disclose, don't let others know, your stuff because you're not there for you. And I'm like, well, but how do they know? How do they know that I care? How do they know that
That you
I have
understand, right?
some inkling of what
Yeah.
they're going through, right? Some understanding. And so I'm maybe a little atypical in that I am willing to share my story in session, and I think it makes a difference. And Kristen does the same as well. So yeah, so we've been married over 30 years, and we went back to school together, and we practiced together. So
Congratulations. That's great. Well, we've mentioned
yeah.
a couple times about affair recovery, and I
Hmm.
want to spend the rest of our time talking about the Hope Rising Conference. And so, can you share just what that is and really who that conference is for?
Right. So Affair Recovery is an organization that mainly is an online presence, and so they have just years and years and years of resources for those who are navigating the infidelity journey. And so there's a lot of resources available there. They have coursework available for both the betrayed and the offending spouses to help them gain some healing, but also give them some community. Uh, so, you can do some of this work online, and they'll put you in groups with others with similar circumstances and, work through kind of their program. They also have some curriculum for couples. So they put you with other couples, and then they have an in-person weekend intensive, which is what Kristen and I attended. Um, the Hope Rising conference is specifically an event that they do annually where they bring together a number of presenters, and it's just for betrayed spouses. It's for them to gain some information, gather some hope, and just get some information that they may not otherwise get, and maybe some new perspectives. So it's been very popular, and it used to be in person. It's kind of switched to it's an online format now. I think with COVID, and it just
Sure. Yeah.
kind of transitioned to that. Uh, so that's kind of what Hope Rising is it's a specific conference for those who have been betrayed.
Now, is that for both husband and wife? Meaning, like, if the husband has been betrayed, the wife's been betrayed, it's for any.
Yes.
So it's not just
Yeah.
for women. Okay.
Correct. Men and women both sign up for it. Can attend that, and the actually presenters of the weekend are they've got Rusty and Lynn who are both presenting, and so they both discuss kind of their experiences, but also it's presented for both men and women who were betrayed.
Yeah. Why do you think this type of an event is important? Why is this a necessary thing? And what would you say to somebody who's kind of on the fence, kind of like you were with the guys that were wanting to get you to come to this intensive of
Hmm.
like, I don't know. I
Right.
mean, maybe they've got the same kind of fears. I think this is, I'm afraid that what I think could happen at this might happen. How would you help people think through, yeah, why do you need to be there?
I think the emotion that comes up most frequently in this journey is shame, even for the betrayed spouse. They tend to take on that kind of attributed shame from their partner's actions, and so they may feel that sense of inferiority. At uh, being betrayed by that spouse who was supposed to have chosen them, right? And so shame tends to lead to isolation. And the antidote for shame is authentic community. And I really believe that, by attending this, it helps you gain a perspective that, wow, you know what? I'm not the only one experiencing these emotions. I'm not the only one who's experiencing this pain. And also gaining some understanding that, even though it's a very difficult journey, there's hope in it. Um, and there can be fulfillment uh, after experiencing this. So I think just being in that community, hearing from others who have experienced some of the same things, or maybe going through some of the same things you are, it kind of pulls you out of that isolation and makes you feel a little more whole.
Yeah, speaking of shame, I heard a wife say it like this one time. She said, um, going to get help, like going to a group, made her feel like she was carrying double shame. because she says, I've got the shame of the betrayal and just kind of wearing that. And then I feel
Mhm.
like, and now I've got the shame of realizing I got to go get help for this. It's almost like there's a sense in which, wouldn't it be just easier to say, have that betrayer just go get fixed and I don't need to do anything?
Mm.
And yet she
Yeah.
was realizing I got to deal with kind of both layers of shame that have come on me as a result of this. And she discovered what you have talked about just now of like, once you get into a safe environment and you realize that your story is not so dissimilar from somebody else who's also experienced that betrayal, there can be that sense of belonging and relief. And I'm in a
Mhm.
place that I can be helped rather than further wounded. Can you talk about you? I see that you and your wife are doing one of the sessions. It sounds like there's some, I guess, breakout sessions or multiple sessions that are going on.
Right.
Can you share with us a little bit about what you and your wife are going to be sharing at the conference?
Yeah, we're presenting together, and so uh, we're going to be discussing some of the common questions that come up for those who are trying to heal from a partner's sexual addiction. And so, of course, that being my story, struggling with sexual addiction, and Kristen having to work through that and find her own healing
Mhm.
through that. Um, so so we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what sexual addiction is, and helping those who uh, don't struggle with it, because that's typically what happens is the betrayed spouse goes, why? I need to understand why this has happened to me, and why you chose those behaviors. And that was the struggle for Kristen and I, is that it took me a while to really get to the root of it, and gain an understanding for myself. And when I did, I tried to explain that to Kristen, and she's like, okay, I understand it, but I don't understand it. It's like there was the head knowledge, but she just could not grasp, um, an understanding of how somebody could choose to do this, because she's not wired that way,
Mhm.
and she would never have chosen to participate in those poor behaviors. And uh, so we'll give a little bit of perspective on trying to understand what's behind the addiction, but also from the betrayed partner's perspective. How do you re-engage in that relationship? How do you know your partner is safe? um, when you're talking about uh, infidelity, that might be okay. There was one affair partner, and it was kind of an emotional relationship. Well, once you end that relationship and you do work to separate that, I mean, you can kind of, somebody can say, well, I can kind of see, that that's not an issue with that person anymore. And so then there's some safety. But when you're dealing with, content flying at you culturally from everywhere, then that's, that's pretty difficult, because, it doesn't matter how far out you get, there's still going to be triggers and images and things that are suggestive that could kind of trigger that behavior again. So it's a little bit different journey, and so just trying to understand that. And so Kristen's got some really great perspectives on
Mhm.
what to look for uh, when you're looking for a safe partner. Are they safe from those addictive tendencies?
Yeah. So as we kind of land the plane here, I've got a question that I can imagine maybe a number of our listeners would have is okay. So you've got, let's say, a wife or a husband out there that is saying, my partner, um, they have not had a physical affair, but they have betrayed me sexually through pornography and other things. Would this conference still be helpful for me, or is this only for people that have experienced a physical affair of betrayal?
Oh no, we actually, pornography. It kind of depends. We have I see personally a lot of clients who, their partner, the betrayal has been pornography. And, it can be just as painful and just as damaging
Mhm.
to a betrayed spouse, even if the acting out is only pornography and it's only through, you know, multimedia means or whatever, and there hasn't been a physical affair, it's still betrayal. And we do discuss that some in our talk as well. But and we often, through affair recovery, when we have couples, attend uh, the EMS emergency marital seminar intensive, that is their story. The betrayal has been pornography, and so it, again, the recovery still looks a lot the same.
Yeah. Well, Brad, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for being open and honest about your own story, and praise God for what He's done in your marriage and how you're using, both you and your wife are using that to help others. And thanks for also sharing with us about the Hope Rising conference. Where can people go to get maybe more information about even what you and your wife are doing, but also the Hope Rising conference?
Yeah, so I think if you can go to affairrecovery.com, and if you want to Google affair recovery hope rising, it should take you to a link for the 2024 uh, registration, and so you can go check it out there. You can see a list of all the speakers and the topics that are going on. Um, and again, affairrecovery.com has a ton of resources available for those that are struggling. Kristen and I were therapists in Fort Worth, Texas, and so our business is Restful Mind Therapy, so restfulmindtherapy.com. Uh, and we also do a lot of virtual sessions, so anybody, you don't have to be in Fort Worth to seek our services. So
Yeah. Well, thanks. We'll be sure to put all that in the show notes. But thanks again for being with us, Brad.
absolutely, thank you very much, Jonathan.
Yeah. So, listeners and viewers, we're going to put all those links into the show notes. So, it'll be real easy for you to find Brad and Kristen. It'll be real easy for you to find the Hope Rising Conference. Please share that with anybody that you also think could benefit from those services. We want to help you take your next best step towards wholeness in Christ. So, reach out to us. And we look forward to seeing you back here again next time on the Pure Sex Radio program. Take care.